Imagine a place where the edge of the continent isn't a boundary, but a beginning. Where the pulse of the earth is felt in the steam of volcanic vents and the slow, grinding movement of glaciers. A place where rain doesn't just fall, it breathes life into emerald cathedrals of moss so thick it swallows the sound of your own footsteps. This is Washington. Tucked into the far northwest corner of the United States, this is a land defined by dramatic transitions. To the west, the Pacific Ocean thunders against sea stacks that have stood as silent sentinels for millennia. In the center, the Cascade Range rises like a spine of ice and fire, home to some of the most dangerous and beautiful peaks on the planet. And to the east, the green fades into the scorched golds and deep basalt canyons of a high desert carved by floods of biblical proportions. You're watching Era Trails, the channel where we slow down, look closer, and chase the why behind the view. If you find value in journeys that favor the rhythm of the land over the rush of the highway, consider liking this video and subscribing. It tells us you're ready to go further down the trail. For this journey, we are tracing a line across the evergreen state. We begin where the land meets the water at Palouse, moving through the silent, dripping halls of the Hoh rainforest. We'll cross the churning currents of Deception Pass and climb toward the frozen heights of Kulshan and Tahoma. Finally, we will descend into the scarred beauty of Lewitt and follow the path of ancient glacial waters through the Grand Coulee to the rolling dunes of the Palouse. Long before it was a state, this was, and remains, the ancestral home of the Coast Salish, Quileute, Yakama, Nez Perce, and many other indigenous nations who have understood the temperament of this land since time immemorial. Their stories are etched into the stone and woven into the cedar bark. The air here smells of salt, damp earth, and resinous hemlock. The temperature shifts from the biting spray of the coast to the thin, crisp air of the alpine ridges. This is Wonders of Washington. Let's begin the trail. The transition from the rolling swells of the Pacific Ocean to the jagged edge of Washington is not a gradual one. It is a collision at Palouse and Ruby Beach. You are standing on the front lines of a tectonic war that has been unfolding for over 50 million years. The air here is heavy, thick with a fine pressurized mist that tastes of salt and ancient minerals. Even on a calm day, the sound is immense, a low-frequency thrumming that vibrates in your chest. The result of thousands of tons of water slamming into the Olympic Peninsula's western flank. The ground beneath your boots is composed of the Hoh rock assemblage, a chaotic jumble of siltstone, sandstone, and conglomerate. These rocks weren't born here. They were scraped off the top of the Juan de Fuca plate as it slid and continues to slide beneath the North American plate in a process known as subduction. This is an accretionary wedge, a geological scrap heap of the deep ocean floor that has been uplifted and thrust into the light. Walking along the shoreline at Ruby Beach, the scale of this upheaval is visible in the sea stacks. Massive, isolated towers of rock that rise out of the surf like the ruins of a drowned fortress. These are the harder remnants of the coastline, stubborn pillars of basalt and breccia that have resisted the relentless hydraulic mining of the waves. Some, like Abbey Island, are accessible only when the tide retreats, leaving behind a glistening, ribbed floor of wet sand that mirrors the sky. The temperature here is a constant, cool dampness, usually hovering near 13 degrees Celsius, regardless of the season. The wind carries the sharp ozonic scent of kelp forests being torn apart by the tide. To the north, the Destruction Island Lighthouse flickers in the distance, a reminder of the treacherous shoals created by these submerged mountain peaks. Further inland, the landscape is defined by the Olympic Mountains, which act as a massive rain shadow. But here on the coast, there is no shelter. The cliffs are composed of glacial flour, fine gray sediment left behind by the massive ice sheets of the Pleistocene. These cliffs are soft, constantly eroding and spilling massive Sitka spruce trees onto the beach. These fallen giants, stripped of their bark and bleached bone white by the salt and sun, litter the high tide line like the ribcage of a leviathan. One of the most peculiar geological features here is the Kalaloch Tree of Life, or the tree root cave. Here, the earth has literally been washed out from under a massive spruce, leaving its gnarled root system suspended in midair, spanning a void created by a small freshwater stream. It is a testament to the precarious balance of this coast. The land is disappearing into the sea, even as the tectonic plates push it higher. The sound inside this hollowed-out space is a haunting echo of dripping water and the muffled roar of the nearby breakers, a sensory bubble where the internal plumbing of the forest is laid bare. To walk through the coastal fringe of the Olympic Peninsula is to enter a world that is more vertical than horizontal. The biology here is a direct response to the rain machine created by the Pacific Ocean. The air is perpetually saturated, a cool 11 degrees Celsius soup of moisture that clings to every surface. The scent is a complex layering of decaying wood, the sharp sweetness of Sitka spruce, and the briny, sulfurous odor of the tide flats. The Sitka spruce is the undisputed monarch of this coastline. These trees have evolved a unique tolerance for salt spray, often growing right to the edge of the high tide line. Their bark is thick and scaly, like the hide of an ancient reptile, protecting them from the abrasive wind-blown sand. Because the soil here is often shallow and waterlogged, these giants develop massive spreading root systems that frequently interlock with neighboring trees, creating a subterranean web of stability. When one falls, it becomes a nurse log, a horizontal nursery, where the next generation of hemlock and cedar sprouts from the mossy remains of the ancestor. Beneath the canopy, the ground is a riot of green. The sword fern dominates the understory, its stiff, leathery fronds reaching out like green feathers to catch the filtered light. Intermingled with the ferns is the salal, a hardy shrub with waxy, bell-shaped flowers and deep purple berries that have been a staple food source for the Quileute and Ho peoples for generations. The fauna of the coastal strip is as much about the intertidal zone as it is the forest. In the tide pools of Ruby Beach, life is compressed into miniature colorful dramas. The ochre sea star, ranging in hue from deep purple to vibrant orange, clings to the basalt rocks with thousands of tiny suction cup feet, defying the pull of the retreating tide. They share these pools with the giant green anemone, whose emerald tentacles sway in the current like underwater grass, stinging microscopic prey with paralyzing precision. The soundscape of the forest is punctuated by the high-pitched metallic tink of the winter wren, a bird so small it is often heard long before it is seen darting through the root tangles. Overhead, the bald eagle is a constant presence, its piercing whistles cutting through the ambient roar of the surf. Perhaps the most elusive resident of this coastal edge is the Roosevelt elk. These are the largest of the elk species, identifiable by their darker coats and heavier builds. Adaptations for navigating the dense, tangled brush of the temperate rainforest. At dawn, you might find their deep, cloven hoof prints pressed into the wet sand of Kalaloch, where they occasionally venture out of the timber to lick salt from the rocks or move between grazing meadows. The temperature drops as the sun stalls behind the clouds, and the forest feels alive, breathing in the fog and exhaling a deep, ancient quiet. Long before the first European sails were sighted on the horizon, this coastline was and remains the spiritual and physical home of the Quileute, Ho, and Quinault peoples. To understand this land, one must look past the modern maps and recognize the deep human history etched into the very stones of Ruby Beach. For the indigenous nations of the coast, the wilderness was never empty. It was a curated landscape of seasonal camps, spiritual sites, and a vast maritime highway. The Quileute people, whose name translates to woolly dog, in reference to a now extinct breed of dog they once raised for fiber, have a connection to this earth that is measured in millennia, not centuries. Their oral traditions speak of the Great Flood and the Thunderbird, a powerful deity whose wings were said to cause the thunder and whose eyes flashed with lightning. According to legend, it was the Thunderbird who fought a monumental battle with the whale, a story that many geologists now believe is a cultural memory of a massive subduction zone earthquake and subsequent tsunami that struck this coast in January 1700. The arrival of colonial explorers in the late 18th century brought a radical shift in how this land was perceived. In 1775, the Spanish explorer Bruno de Hecheta anchored nearby, naming the island to the north Isla de Dolores after a violent encounter with the local inhabitants. Later, the British captain Charles William Barclay arrived in 1787, renaming the same landmass Destruction Island. These names reflect the European perspective of a hostile, treacherous frontier, contrasting sharply with the indigenous view of the coast as a bountiful provider. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the focus shifted to extraction. The massive western red cedar and Douglas fir forests were viewed as timber capital. At Caliloch, early settlers attempted to farm the nutrient-poor glacial soils, often failing against the relentless moisture and salt. However, the establishment of the Olympic National Park in 1938, pushed forward by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, marked a turning point toward preservation. Today, as you stand on the shore, the silence is a heavy historical weight. The salt air carries the scent of smoke from distant chimneys and the metallic tang of the modern world. But it cannot mask the older smells of cedar and kelp. The history of this place is a story of endurance, of the rocks against the sea, and of the indigenous people against the tides of colonization. The architecture of the Olympic coast is not defined by soaring skylines or glass facades, but by a profound adaptation to the environment. Here, the built environment is a dialogue between human necessity and the overwhelming power of the Pacific Ocean. The temperature hovers around 10 degrees Celsius, and the air carries the scent of burning cedar and the damp metallic tang of rusted iron. At Caliloch, the most prominent structure is the Caliloch Lodge, perched precariously on a bluff overlooking the sea. Built in the 1920s by Charles W. Becker, the main lodge and its weathered cabins are constructed from local lumber. Designed with steeply pitched roofs to shed the relentless coastal rains that can exceed 100 inches a year. The wood is untreated, allowed to weather into a silvery gray patina that mimics the color of the driftwood on the beach below. Inside, the sound of the wind rattling the window panes is a constant companion, creating an atmosphere of cozy isolation. However, the deeper architectural history of this region belongs to the Quileute and Hoh peoples. Traditionally, their villages consisted of massive plank houses constructed from western red cedar. These structures were masterpieces of engineering, featuring removable wall planks that could be adjusted to control ventilation or move to seasonal fishing camps. The smell of these homes was a rich blend of wood smoke, dried salmon, and the sweet, grassy aroma of woven cattail mats. These houses weren't just shelters, they were cultural vessels, with interior posts often carved with family crests and ancestral stories, representing a lineage that predates the concept of Washington by thousands of years. Further north, the Destruction Island Lighthouse, though no longer open to the public, stands as a monument to the industrial architecture of the late 19th century. Its 94-foot conical tower was designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and the corrosive effects of salt air. The cultural significance of these structures lies in their representation of a frontier mentality. The effort to impose order and safety on a coastline that the indigenous residents already knew intimately. Music and ritual also form part of this cultural landscape. The rhythmic of the Quileute drum, often accompanied by high-pitched melodic chanting, mirrors the heartbeat of the ocean. These songs are not merely performances, they are oral maps, legal records, and spiritual invocations. When the fog rolls in, dampening the light and muffling the sound of the modern world, it is these ancient vibrations that seem most at home on the wind. The legacy of the Olympic coast is one of perpetual motion. It is a place that refuses to be static, existing in a state of constant, rhythmic destruction and rebirth. As the Pacific Ocean continues its relentless assault on the whole rock assemblage, the shoreline moves inland at a rate of several inches per year, a geological blink of an eye that creates a unique challenge for those who seek to manage and preserve this land. In the modern era, the primary challenge facing this stretch of the Olympic National Park is the reality of a changing climate. The rising sea levels and increasing frequency of severe winter storms are accelerating the erosion of the glacial bluffs. The Kalaloch Tree of Life, once a stable curiosity, now stands as a fragile symbol of this vulnerability. As the freshwater stream beneath it grows more turbulent with heavier rainfall, the gap widens, and the day when this resilient Sitka spruce finally yields to gravity draws closer. This is the paradox of conservation in Washington, trying to protect a landscape whose very nature is to change. Furthermore, the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary, which encompasses over 3,000 square miles of the adjacent ocean, represents a modern effort to protect the blue half of this ecosystem. Here, the legacy of overfishing and industrial pollution is being addressed through collaborative management between federal agencies and the Hoh, Maka, Quileute, and Quinault nations. This partnership is a significant transition from the exclusionary conservation models of the early 20th century, recognizing that the health of the land and the sovereignty of its indigenous stewards are inseparable. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon at Ruby Beach, the temperature drops to a crisp 8 degrees Celsius. The light turns a bruised purple, casting long, distorted shadows of the sea stacks across the wet sand. The sound of the retreating tide is a raspy, gravelly hiss as the water drags millions of tiny pebbles back toward the deep. We prepare to leave the salt-crusted air of the coast behind. Our trail now turns inland, moving away from the crashing surf and toward the deep, muffled silence of the interior. We are heading for a place where the rain is transformed from a storm into a life force, and where the scale of the trees makes the coastal giants look like saplings. The mist is thickening, drifting through the car windows with the scent of wet cedar and ancient decay. We are entering the heart of the cathedral. Next, we arrive at the Hoh rainforest. Leaving the salt-shattered cliffs of the coast, we travel east, deeper into the heart of the Olympic Peninsula. The road narrows, the sky vanishes beneath a canopy of emerald, and the temperature drops a perceptible 5 degrees. The air here is no longer a mist, it is a weight, cool, thick, and smelling intensely of wet stone and ancient anaerobic decay. This is the Hoh rainforest, one of the few remaining examples of a temperate rainforest in the northern hemisphere. The geology of the Hoh Valley is a story of glacial plumbing. While the coast was shaped by the tectonic scraping of the ocean floor, this valley was carved by the slow, gravitational muscle of the Hoh Glacier. During the Pleistocene epoch, a river of ice over 1,000 feet thick ground its way down from the heights of Mount Olympus toward the sea. As it moved, it acted like a giant rasp, scouring the basalt and sedimentary rock into a broad, U-shaped valley. Today, the valley floor is a deep accumulation of glacial outwash. A thick layer of gravel, silt, and cobbles left behind as the ice retreated roughly 10,000 years ago. This porous floor is the secret to the forest's survival. Although the Hoh receives an average of 140 inches of rain annually, the valley doesn't turn into a swamp. Instead, the gravel acts as a massive natural filter, allowing the water to drain into the Hoh River, which milky gray with glacial flour. Fine rock particles ground so small they remain suspended in the water, giving the river a ghostly, opaque appearance. Walking the Hall of Mosses trail, you see the landscape is not flat, but undulating. These ridges are moraines, piles of rocky debris pushed aside by the glacier's snout. The soil sitting atop this debris is surprisingly thin, a delicate layer of organic duff that has taken thousands of years to accumulate. Because the ground is so saturated, the geological process here is one of solifluction, where the waterlogged soil slowly creeps downslope, carrying entire groves of trees with it in a slow-motion landslide that lasts centuries. The sound here is unlike anywhere else on Earth. It is the sound of the 1 square inch of silence, a designated spot in the Hoh intended to be the quietest place in the United States. The geology, the soft moss-covered rocks, and the porous floor absorb sound rather than reflecting it. The temperature lingers at a damp 9 degrees Celsius, and as you stand between the towering valley walls, you realize you aren't just in a forest. You are inside a geological lung, breathing in the moisture exhaled by the stones themselves. To step off the gravel path in the Hoh is to realize that the concept of individual plants is a human abstraction. The air is a cool, oxygen-rich, tasting faintly of ozone and the peppery scent of lady fern. Every square inch of vertical and horizontal space is occupied. The most defining ecological feature of this forest is the epiphyte, plants that grow upon other plants. The big-leaf maple serves as the primary host for this hanging garden. In the Hoh, the weight of the moss and ferns growing on a single maple can exceed 4 times the weight of the tree's own foliage. The club moss hangs in long, pale green curtains, draping from branches like wet wool. These mats of moss act as aerial sponges, capturing moisture directly from the clouds and creating a canopy soil high above the ground where insects and even small amphibians live their entire lives without ever touching the earth. Among the giants, the western hemlock and the Douglas fir reach heights that defy the eye. Some of these trees have been standing for over 800 years. Their strategy for survival in this light-starved environment is the gap phase dynamics. When an ancient tree finally succumbs to age or wind, it crashes down, creating a light gap in the canopy. This triggers a frantic race among the seedlings below, often These seedlings take root on the fallen trunk of their predecessor. Decades later, as the nurse log rots away, the new trees are left standing on stilt roots, elevated above the forest floor like wooden tripods. The fauna of the Hoh is dictated by the silence. The Roosevelt elk is the ecosystem's architect. By grazing on the understory, they prevent the forest from becoming an impenetrable thicket, creating the open, park-like cathedrals that define the Hall of Mosses. In the winter, their breath hangs in the damp air like ghosts. You might also encounter the Pacific banana slug, reaching up to 25 centimeters in length and ranging in color from bright yellow to mottled brown. These mollusks are the forest's essential recyclers, breaking down the massive amount of fallen organic matter into nutrient-rich soil. High above, the northern spotted owl hunts in the gloom. Its feathers are evolved for silent flight, allowing it to move through the dense canopy without a sound. The soundscape is further shaped by the varied thrush, whose long, haunting, single-note whistle sounds like a digital beep echoing through an ancient stone chamber. A sound that perfectly captures the eerie, timeless quality of the Hoh. In the Hoh rainforest, time is measured not by the ticking of a clock, but by the slow accumulation of detritus on the forest floor. The air remains steady, cool, carrying the faint, metallic scent of the Hoh River's glacial silt. To understand the human history of this valley, one must first acknowledge that for the Hoh people, this was never a wilderness to be conquered, but a home that provided everything necessary for a sophisticated way of life. The Hoh tribe is part of the Quileute linguistic family, and their traditional territory centered on the mouth and the upper reaches of the Hoh River. For thousands of years, the river was their lifeblood. Their history is inextricably linked to the western red cedar, which they referred to as the Tree of Life, long before the term became a tourist catchphrase. Every part of the tree was utilized, the wood for massive plank houses and seagoing canoes, the bark for clothing and baskets, and the roots for durable cordage. The deep time narrative of the Hoh changed violently in the mid-19th century. In 1855, the Quileute and Hoh were pressured into signing the Treaty of Olympia, which ceded vast swaths of their ancestral forest to the United States government. The subsequent decades saw the arrival of homesteaders who viewed the massive timber as an obstacle to be cleared or a commodity to be sold. One of the most notable sub-destinations in the valley's colonial history is the Taft's homestead, where early settlers attempted to graze cattle in the rain-soaked meadows. A grueling struggle against a landscape that naturally wants to be forest, not pasture. The shift from extraction to preservation was a slow, contentious process. By the early 1900s, the roar of the crosscut saw was a constant sound in the valley. It wasn't until 1938 that the Hoh was formally protected within the boundaries of Olympic National Park. This preservation was not just about the trees. It was a recognition of the valley's unique status as a biological refugium. a place where species survived the last ice age and continue to thrive in a microclimate that has remained largely unchanged for millennia. Today, the deep time of the Hoh is felt in the absolute silence of the upper valley. When you stand among the trees, you are standing in a living record of the last 10,000 years. The sound of the river is a constant, low-frequency hum, a reminder that the water currently flowing past you was frozen into glacial ice centuries before the first explorer ever set foot on these shores. The architecture of the Hoh Valley is a study in temporal permanence versus material decay. In a landscape that receives over 12 feet of rain annually, human structures must either breathe with the moisture or be reclaimed by the moss within a single generation. The air here carries a heavy, sweet scent, a mixture of fermenting cedar needles and the clean, cold ozone rising from the churning Hoh River. Historically, the Hoh engineered a culture of movable architecture. Their traditional longhouses were constructed from massive hand-split planks of western red cedar. These planks were not nailed, but lashed with rot-resistant spruce root cordage. This allowed families to dismantle the walls of their homes and transport them by canoe to seasonal fishing sites, leaving only the massive post and beam skeletons behind. The interior of these homes sounded like a rhythmic sanctuary. The rain drumming against the thick cedar roof, while the central hearth fire crackled, its smoke curing the salmon hanging from the rafters. A unique cultural sub-destination within the forest is the Hoh River Trail Shelter. Built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, this structure exemplifies National Park Service rustic architecture. Utilizing pioneer-style notch-and-groove log construction, it was designed to look as though it grew directly from the forest floor. The logs are thick enough to insulate against the biting dampness of a winter night, and the stone fireplace is built from rounded river cobbles, basalt and sandstone, scavenged from the nearby banks. It represents a transition in cultural values, from the indigenous architecture of utility and movement to the colonial architecture of permanence and recreation. The culture of the Hoh today is also defined by the acoustic ecology movement. Because the forest is one of the last places on the continent free from significant human-generated noise, it has become a cultural cathedral for sound recordists and meditators. The music of this place is the low-frequency thud of a falling branch, the rasping caw of a Steller's jay, and the constant white noise rush of the river. To be here is to participate in a culture of listening, a ritual of silence that demands one slow their heart rate to match the slow, hydraulic pulse of the trees. It is a window into what much of the Pacific Northwest looked like before the industrial logging era of the 19th and 20th centuries. However, this legacy is currently in a state of delicate transition. As we witness the retreat of the Blue Glacier on Mount Olympus, the very source of the Hoh River is shrinking. This glacial recession means that the river's summer flow is becoming warmer and less consistent, threatening the life cycle of the steelhead trout and coho salmon that are the cornerstone of the local food web. conservation efforts here have moved toward landscape-scale management. This involves not just protecting the trees within the park boundaries, but managing the entire watershed from the mountain peaks to the ocean. The transition is visible at the Oxbow Conservation Area, a sub-destination just outside the park, where former industrial timberlands are being actively restored. Here, the monoculture of densely packed, same-age trees is being thinned to allow sunlight back to the forest floor, mimicking the natural light gaps found in the ancient groves of the Hoh. As the day begins to wane, the green of the forest deepens into a shadowy obsidian hue. The sound of the river seems to grow louder as the wind dies down, a steady glacial roar that echoes off the valley walls. The humidity clings to your skin like a second layer of clothing, and the smell of the forest becomes sharper, more earthy, more ancient. We prepare to leave the deep, vertical world of the rainforest. Our path now takes us out of the valley and toward the northeastern tip of the peninsula. We are moving from the wild, unpeeled bark of the ancient woods toward a place where the wood has been planed, painted, and shaped into the ornate Victorian facades of a maritime outpost. The silence of the Hoh stays with you, a ringing in the ears that only fades as we reach the salt water again. Next, we arrive at the Victorian seaport of Port Townsend. As we emerge from the dense, vertical shadows of the Olympic interior, the landscape undergoes a sudden, expansive opening. The towering evergreens give way to wind-swept bluffs, and the scent of damp moss is replaced by the sharp, bracing sting of salt air and sun-warmed wild roses. We have reached the northeastern tip of the peninsula, where the Strait of Juan de Fuca meets Admiralty Inlet. This is Port Townsend, a city that feels less like a modern settlement and more like a Victorian dream anchored to a glacial graveyard. The geology of this point is defined by the Vashon Glaciation, the last major icy advance that retreated roughly 13,000 years ago. Unlike the jagged, tectonic uplift of the coast, the ground here is composed of glacial till, a compacted, unsorted mix of clay, sand, and boulders dropped by the retreating ice sheet. The high bluffs of Morgan Hill, which overlook the downtown, are essentially massive piles of debris left behind by a mile-thick wall of ice. Walking along the shoreline at Point Wilson, the sensory experience is dominated by the elements. The wind here is a constant physical presence, often carrying the hollow, rhythmic tonk of a distant bellbuoy. The beach is not made of sand, but of glacial erratics, smooth, water-rounded stones of granite and basalt that were carried hundreds of miles from British Columbia by the ice and dumped here. When the tide pulls back, the stones rattle against one another with a dry, clattering sound that echoes the movement of the water. The first impression of the town itself is one of startling architectural preservation. From the water, the key city appears as a row of ornate red brick bastions rising directly from the tides. The downtown sits on a narrow flat created by backfilling the shoreline, while the residential district looms above on the bluff, accessible by steep wooden staircases. There is a strange, quiet dignity to the light here. It has a silvery, translucent quality common to the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains. Because the peaks to the west wring out most of the moisture, Port Townsend receives only about 19 inches of rain a year, less than half of what falls in Seattle. This dry, crisp atmosphere preserves the scent of the sea, the weathered cedar of the docks, and the faint, metallic tang of the nearby boatyards. At the edge of the town lies Fort Worden, a sub-destination that serves as a transition between the natural and the built. Here, the massive concrete batteries of the Coast Artillery Corps are built directly into the glacial hills. The air inside these bunkers is cold and smells of damp lime and old iron, a stark contrast to the bright grassy meadows above where deer graze in the sun. Standing on the ramparts, you can look across the churning waters of the strait and feel the strategic weight of this location, a sentinel point at the gateway to Puget Sound. The history of Port Townsend is a story of a boom that froze in midair. To walk these streets is to walk through a city of dreams that were never quite realized. Before the arrival of the first white settlers in 1851, this area was the ancestral home of the Snoqualmie people. They knew this point as Katai, a vital location for harvesting shellfish and managing the complex currents of the Admiralty Inlet. Their culture was, and remains, rooted in the seasonal rhythms of the water, a stark contrast to the permanent, rigid brick-and-mortar ambitions that would soon follow. In the late 1880s, Port Townsend was positioned to become the premier port of the Pacific Northwest. Speculators poured money into the city, convinced it would be the terminus of the Northern Pacific Railroad. This era produced the architectural golden age of the town, defined by the Victorian Romanesque style. The Jefferson County Courthouse, built in 1892, is a prime example. Its soaring clock tower and deep red brickwork were meant to signal a metropolitan future. However, the railroad never arrived. It stopped in Tacoma instead. The local economy collapsed, but the lack of progress in the 20th century became the city's greatest asset. The Victorian buildings were never torn down to make way for skyscrapers. Today, the culture of Port Townsend is defined by the wooden boatway. This isn't just a hobby, it's a sensory ritual. A visit to the Northwest Maritime Center reveals a community dedicated to the preservation of maritime craftsmanship. The air here is heavy, with the smell of Dutch marine varnish, steamed white oak, and sawdust. The soundscape is a rhythmic percussion of hammers against copper roves and the high-pitched whine of a bandsaw. This cultural anchor keeps the town's history alive not as a museum, but as a working trade. A unique sub-destination within the city is the Chelan Avenue Stairs. These steep wooden public stairways connect the uptown residential district to the downtown waterfront. Climbing them, you feel the physical transition between the working-class docks and the ornate mansions of the 19th century elite. The wood of the handrails is smoothed by decades of palms, and the air cools as you rise above the heat-retaining brick of the lower shops. As we prepare for departure, we head to the Point Wilson Lighthouse. Standing at the very tip of the peninsula, the wind here is fierce, often whipping the sea into a frothy, white-capped frenzy. The light flashes its warning over the graveyard of the giant, a stretch of water known for its treacherous converging tides. We are leaving the stability of the Victorian bluffs behind. We are leaving the stability of the Victorian bluffs behind. Our trail now takes us across the water toward the narrow, churning throat of the state's internal sea. We are moving from the preservation of human architecture to a place where the geology itself is in a constant, violent rush. The scent of the salt is deepening, and the sound of the engine is joined by the low, haunting groan of the tide moving through a narrow gap. Next, we arrive at the bridge over Deception Pass. Leaving the Victorian quiet of Port Townsend, the trail takes us across the water toward a geography defined by narrow margins and violent energy. As we approach the northern tip of Whidbey Island, the open expanse of the Strait of Juan de Fuca begins to compress. The horizon vanishes, replaced by towering walls of dark, fractured stone that seem to lean over the water. This is Deception Pass, a narrow gap between Whidbey and Fidalgo Island, where the sea behaves more like a mountain river than a coastal inlet. The geology here is a stark departure from the soft glacial tills of the peninsula. We are standing on the Fidalgo ophiolite, a rare sequence of the Earth's crust that was once part of the deep ocean floor. These rocks, primarily serpentinite and sheeted dikes, were forged miles beneath the sea, then thrust upward by tectonic collision and eventually polished by the same Cordilleran ice sheet that carved the rest of the Puget Sound. The stone is hard, dark, and resilient, rising in jagged cliffs that drop nearly 180 feet straight into the churning emerald water below. The first impression of the pass is one of overwhelming sensory motion. Even from the height of the bridge, you can hear the water, a low, rhythmic growl punctuated by the sharp crack of whirlpools collapsing. Twice a day, as the tides shift, nearly 900 million gallons of water are forced through this 180-foot wide gap. The current can reach speeds of 9 knots, creating standing waves and boils where the water seems to erupt from below. The air is cool and tastes of deep sea salt and crushed pine needles carried on a wind that is perpetually funneled through the canyon. Standing at the midpoint of the Deception Pass Bridge, the scale of the landscape becomes dizzying. Below, the water is a kaleidoscope of deep jade and frothy white, swirling around the base of Pass Island. The trees, mostly Douglas fir, and the occasional orange-barked Pacific madrone, cling to the vertical rock faces at impossible angles, their roots anchored in the narrowest of fissures. There is a sense of precariousness here, a feeling that the land is barely holding on against the liquid force surging beneath it. A unique sub-destination to ground this experience is Lottie Bay. Tucked just to the east of the main bridge, this small, sheltered cove offers a glimpse into the quieter side of the pass. Here, the water is still enough to reflect the surrounding cliffs and the smell of the forest. It is a place to witness the transition of the tide in silence, watching as the kelp forests sway in the hidden pull of the deep currents while the surface remains as smooth as glass. The history of Deception Pass is contained within its name, a linguistic monument to a colonial mistake. Long before the arrival of the British Royal Navy, these shores were the seasonal home of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Samish and Swinomish tribes. They called the pass Skatad, navigating these treacherous waters in cedar canoes with a mastery of the tidal cycles that modern sailors still envy. For the indigenous inhabitants, the pass was not a deception, but a provider. A natural funnel that brought an abundance of Pacific herring and Chinook salmon directly to their doorsteps. The colonial name arrived in 1792 when Joseph Whidbey, a master on Captain George Vancouver's expedition, realized that what they had assumed was a deep peninsula was actually a massive island. Vancouver, feeling deceived by the narrowness of the gap, charted it as Deception Pass. This transition from a site of sustainable harvest to a point on a colonial map marked the beginning of a new era of extraction. By the early 20th century, the surrounding old-growth forests were under threat, leading to the creation of Deception Pass State Park in 1922. The cultural heart of the pass today is found in the work of the Civilian Conservation Corps. During the Great Depression, young men lived in camps here, hand-carving the trails and building the iconic stone guardrails that line the road. Their key activity was the construction of the Deception Pass Bridge, completed in 1935. Before the bridge, travel between the islands required a ferry triggered by hitting a hanging saw blade with a hammer. The bridge changed the rhythm of life here, turning a remote outpost into a connected corridor. The smell of the bridge is a mix of old iron and the exhaust of passing travelers, yet the sound remains dominated by the wind whistling through the steel spans. A final sub-destination for the curious traveler is Cornet Bay. Located on the Whidbey side, this area serves as a cultural hub for environmental education and traditional shellfishing. The scent here is sweeter, less of the open sea, and more of the mudflats and drying seaweed. It is a place where the community gathers to learn about the delicate balance of the Puget Sound ecosystem, continuing a legacy of stewardship that stretches back to the Swinomish ancestors. As we prepare to depart, we cross the bridge one last time, the tires humming against the pavement. The roar of the water below is a constant reminder of the energy that shaped this gap. We are leaving the salt water behind and turning our sights toward the horizon where the land begins to rise. We are moving away from the sea-level drama of the islands and toward the jagged, ice-crowned peaks of the north. The air is losing its saltiness, becoming thinner and sharper. The smell of the lowland forest is giving way to the cold, resinous scent of high-altitude subalpine fir. Next, we arrive at the frozen giant of the north, Mount Baker, known to the Lumi as Kulshan. As we move north from the saltwater corridors, the horizon is suddenly dominated by a monolith of white and blue. This is Mount Baker, though to the Lummi and Nooksack peoples it has always been Kulshan, the Great White Watcher. Standing at 10,781 feet, it is the icy crown of the North Cascades, a landscape defined by verticality and the crushing weight of frozen water. The air here has lost its coastal heaviness. It is thin, sharp, and smells of cold stone and the metallic tang of snow. Geologically, Kulshan is a restless giant. It is the northernmost volcano in the Washington segment of the Pacific Ring of Fire, sitting atop the Cascadia subduction zone. While the peaks around it are composed of ancient, eroded metamorphic rock, Mount Baker is a relatively young stratovolcano. Most of what we see today was built in the last 140,000 years, a rapid construction of andesite and dacite lava flows. The mountain is an active thermal engine. Even on the coldest days, steam often curls from the Sherman crater, south of the summit, where volcanic gases hiss through vents in the ice. However, the defining geological force of the present isn't fire but ice. Mount Baker is the most heavily glaciated peak in the Cascade Range outside of Mount Rainier. It supports 12 active glaciers, including the massive Coleman and Roosevelt glaciers. These are not static features. They are rivers of ice, grinding the volcanic rock into glacial flour and carving deep radial valleys. The sound of the mountain is punctuated by the occasional crack of a sérac shifting or the distant muffled roar of a meltwater stream cutting through a crevasse. The landscape is a study in extremes. At the higher elevations, the ground is scoria, dark, porous volcanic rock that crunch underfoot like broken pottery. Lower down, the heath meadows represent a fragile geological transition where thin volcanic soils struggle to hold on to the steep slopes. A unique sub-destination to witness this is Artist Point. Located at the end of the Mount Baker Highway, this ridge offers a 360-degree view of the volcanic architecture. To the north lies Kulshan, and to the south, the jagged, non-volcanic spires of Mount Shuksan. The contrast is a geological masterclass, the smooth, rounded dome of the active volcano versus the sharp, chaotic horn of ancient seafloor and island arcs. The ground here feels ancient and temporary, all at once. The landscape is essentially a tall pile of frozen water resting on a furnace. As the sun hits the snow, the air fills with a faint, crystalline shimmer, diamond dust. And the temperature of the wind reminds you that up here the Holocene is just a thin veneer over a persistent ice age. To enter the biological zones of Kulshan is to witness a masterclass in endurance. As you ascend from the river valleys toward the tree line, the lush, chaotic green of the lowlands is replaced by a more disciplined, resilient beauty. The air is remarkably still, carrying the scent of drying needles and the faint, resinous musk of the subalpine fir. These trees are the structural poets of the high country. Their narrow spire-like shapes are an evolutionary response to the massive snow loads of the North Cascades, allowing the winter weight to slide off their branches rather than snapping them. In the mid-elevation forests, the mountain hemlock dominates. Its drooping leading shoot gives it a bowed, humble appearance, as if it is perpetually nodding to the mountain's power. Beneath these giants, the ground is carpeted in pink heather and white moss campion, which bloom in a frantic, brilliant burst during the short summer window. These alpine meadows are among the most fragile ecosystems in Washington. A single footstep can compress the thin, volcanic soil and destroy a decade of growth. The fauna of Mount Baker is defined by specialized adaptations to the vertical world. The mountain goat is the true sovereign of the high ridges. With specialized hooves that have a hard outer shell and a rubbery inner pad, they navigate the near-vertical basalt cliffs of the Black Buttes with terrifying ease. Their thick, creamy white coats are shed in the summer, leaving tufts of wool snagged on the low-growing huckleberry, vaccinium bushes. Lower down, the soundscape is punctuated by the shrill metallic whistle of the hoary marmot. Often called the whistler, this large ground squirrel serves as the mountain sentry, its alarm call echoing across the glacial cirques to warn of a passing golden eagle or a roaming black bear. The bears here are particularly fond of the avalanche lily, digging up the bulbs in the wake of the retreating snow. A unique sub-destination for wildlife observation is Heather Meadows. This area sits in a natural bowl that traps the morning light, creating a microclimate where the American pika can be seen scurrying among the talus or rock slides. These small rabbit-like mammals do not hibernate. Instead, they spend the summer months curing hay piles of dried grasses to sustain them through the long, frozen winters. The sound of their tiny nasal cheep is the quintessential soundtrack of the Baker backcountry. A small, defiant pulse of life against a backdrop of eternal ice. To stand in the shadow of Kulshan is to stand in a place where the human timeline is dwarfed by the rhythmic breathing of the earth. The air is exceptionally still, carrying the scent of ancient, crushed stone and the crisp, ozone-rich tang that precedes a high-altitude storm. For the Lummi, Nooksack, and Upper Skagit peoples, this mountain has never been a destination to be conquered, but a sentient ancestor. Their history with the peak is woven into a deep-time narrative that predates the written word by millennia. According to Nooksack oral tradition, Kulshan was once a person who had two wives, who was Anek, Mount Rainier, and Spiktu. The stories of their displacement and the mountain's eventual isolation are not merely myths. They are metaphorical maps of geological events, reflecting a cultural memory of volcanic eruptions and shifting landscapes. The indigenous names for the surrounding features, like the Nooksack River, which translates to always mountain lemon water, reveal an intimate understanding of the mineral-rich glacial runoff that fuels the entire ecosystem. The transition into the colonial era began in the late 18th century. In 1790, the Spanish explorer Manuel Quimper sighted the peak, naming it La Gran Montana del Carmelo. 2 years later, the British explorer George Vancouver renamed it after his third lieutenant, Joseph Baker, who had first spotted the White Dome from the deck of the HMS Discovery. These naming acts were the first steps in a process of cartographic taming, attempting to claim a peak that the local tribes had lived alongside since the retreat of the last ice sheet. In the 19th century, the mountain became a magnet for a different kind of seeker. The 1858 Fraser River Gold Rush brought thousands of prospectors through the northern foothills. While most were chasing shadows in the stream beds, they blazed the trails that would eventually become the Mount Baker Highway. A significant sub-destination in this history is the Lone Jack Mine. Located on the high ridges near Twin Lakes, this mine produced substantial gold in the late 1890s. The remains of the old stamp mill still sit in the subalpine meadows, the rusted iron smelling of oxidized history and damp earth. A reminder of the brief, frantic attempt to extract wealth from the volcano's flank. The modern history of the mountain shifted toward recreation and preservation in the early 1900s. The first, Marathon to Mount Baker in 1911, a grueling race from Bellingham to the summit and back, solidified the peak's status as a symbol of regional identity. Today, as part of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, the legacy of the mountain is one of balance. It remains a place of spiritual significance for the Coast Salish peoples, a laboratory for glaciologists tracking the climate's shift, and a playground for those who seek the silence of the high ice. High-altitude architecture is a discipline of humility. On the slopes of Kulshan, where the record for the most snowfall in a single season was set at 1,140 inches, humans do not build to dominate the landscape, they build to survive it. The air here carries the scent of seasoned cedar and the faint, sulphurous hint of volcanic activity, while the soundscape is dominated by the rhythmic whump of snow sliding off metal roofs. The primary architectural sub-destination is the Mount Baker Lodge district at Heather Meadows. The original lodge, built in the 1920s, was a masterpiece of Cascadian rustic style, utilizing massive Douglas fir logs and local andesite stone. Though the original structure was lost to fire, the remaining buildings, such as the Heather Meadows Visitor Center, maintain this aesthetic. Built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, the center features thick masonry walls and a steep pitch roof designed to shed several feet of snow in a single afternoon. The stones are rough-hewn, mimicking the fractured basalt of the surrounding ridges, creating a visual transition where the building seems to emerge naturally from the talus slope. Culturally, Mount Baker is defined by a mountain community that bridges the gap between ancient tradition and modern recreation. For the Nooksack and Lummi, the culture of the mountain is preserved through the first salmon ceremony and the continued gathering of high country resources. The ritual of the mountain for these nations involves a deep spiritual silence, a recognition of the peak as a living being. This stands in contrast to, yet exists alongside, the modern ski culture of the Mount Baker ski area. This modern culture is unique for its rejection of the resort mentality. There are no high-rise hotels or luxury shopping malls here. Instead, the culture is centered on the White Salmon Day Lodge, a space that smells of wood smoke, wet wool, and hot coffee. The music of this culture is the clatter of gear and the low hum of the chairlifts, a mechanical counterpoint to the howling winds of the Pan Dome Ridge. It is a culture of hardcore enthusiasts who value the raw, unvarnished power of the North Cascades over the polished amenities of more commercial peaks. Even the temporary architecture of the mountain, the colorful tents of climbers at Heliotrope Ridge, reflects a culture of transience. These nylon shelters are the modern equivalent of the seasonal camps used by indigenous hunters for millennia, representing a human desire to remain, however briefly, in the presence of the Great White Watcher. The legacy of Mount Baker is written in the water it provides. As one of the most significant water towers in the Pacific Northwest, the mountain's glaciers feed the Nooksack and Skagit rivers, providing the cold, oxygenated water necessary for the survival of the bull trout and 5 species of Pacific salmon. However, this legacy is in a period of profound transition. The glaciers of Colchine are retreating at an accelerating rate. The Coleman Glacier, once a sprawling tongue of ice that reached deep into the valley, is pulling back, leaving behind trim lines, ghostly marks on the canyon walls where the ice once sat. This transition is not just a visual change, it is a fundamental shift in the region's hydrology. As the ice bank shrinks, the late summer river flows decrease and the water temperature rises. This creates a conservation deadline for the Nooksack Indian tribe and state biologists who are working to restore riparian habitats to shade the warming waters. A sub-destination that highlights this transition is the Nooksack Falls. Here, the river plunges over a 175-foot basalt cliff. The sound is a thunderous, vibrating roar that can be felt in the soles of your feet. The mist rising from the falls carries the scent of pulverized rock and cold water. This sight is a reminder of the mountain's power, but also its vulnerability. The volume of the falls is a direct reflection of the melting ice above. As the sun sets, casting a final alpenglow pink across the summit of Kulshan, we prepare to leave the high ice behind. The temperature is dropping sharply as the mountain breath, the katabatic wind, begins to pour down the valleys. We are moving from the northern giants toward the central corridor of the Cascades. Our trail leads us south, descending from the volcanic heights toward a place where the mountain's water makes a final, dramatic leap before reaching the lowlands. We are heading for a site of immense spiritual power and industrial history, where the mist of the falls is as much a part of the air as the oxygen itself. Next, we arrive at the sacred thunder of Snoqualmie Falls. As we move south from the high frozen slopes of Kulshan, the landscape begins to soften. The jagged peaks giving way to the rolling, timber-thick foothills of the Central Cascades. The air here loses the biting edge of the alpine and takes on a richer, more humid quality, smelling of saturated earth and the sweet, heavy scent of western red cedar. We are approaching a place where the landscape doesn't just hold water, but hurls it. This is Snoqualmie Falls, a site where the geological history of Washington reaches a thunderous, vertical crescendo. The geology of the falls is a narrative of resistance and diversion. Unlike the volcanic cones to the north, the bedrock here is composed of ancient tertiary volcanic rocks. Specifically, a hard, resistant form of basalt and andesite flows that are roughly 20 million years old. However, the falls as we see them today were shaped by the Vashon glaciation. As the massive ice sheet retreated about 13,000 years ago, it deposited a wall of glacial debris that blocked the original path of the Snoqualmie River. The water was forced to find a new route, eventually spilling over a pre-existing basalt cliff, carving the 268-foot that remains one of the state's most powerful natural features. The first impression of the falls is an assault on the senses. Before you see the water, you feel it, a low-frequency vibration that hums in the soles of your feet. The sound is a white noise roar so absolute it seems to hollow out the air. As you reach the observation decks, the temperature drops significantly, chilled by the waterfall wind created by the sheer volume of the plummeting river. A perpetual shroud of mist hangs over the plunge pool, coating every railing and leaf in a glistening film of cold moisture. The water of the Snoqualmie River is often a deep, tea-colored brown, stained by the tannins of the upstream forests, which contrasts sharply with the brilliant, frothy white of the falls themselves. Looking down into the canyon, you see the plunge pool, a deep basin scoured out of the riverbed by the hydraulic force of the water over millennia. A unique sub-destination to experience this geology up close is the lower observation deck. Accessible via a steep half-mile trail that descends through a canopy of big-leaf maples. At the bottom, the perspective shifts. You are no longer looking down at the power, but up at it. The air here is even wetter, smelling of pulverized stone and the mossy, ancient breath of the canyon walls. Here, the scale of the basalt columns, formed as the ancient lava cooled and cracked, is visible, standing like frozen sentinels behind the curtain of falling water. The history of Snoqualmie Falls is a narrative of profound spiritual significance meeting the birth of the industrial Pacific Northwest. For the Snoqualmie people, this is the center of the universe. Their traditional name for the falls translates to the moon's place, and their oral history describes the falls as the site where first man and first woman were created. The mist rising from the plunge pool is believed to be a connective veil between the physical and spiritual worlds, carrying prayers from the earth up to the ancestors. To the Snoqualmie, the falls are not a landmark. They are a living relative, a sacred site of healing and revelation that has been honored for thousands of years. The transition to the modern era began in the late 19th century, when the river's immense hydraulic energy caught the eye of colonial engineers. In 1898, Charles Baker designed and moved forward with the construction of the Snoqualmie Falls cavity generating plant. This was a global first, a power plant located entirely underground, carved into the basalt bedrock 270 feet below the surface to protect the machinery from the damp environment and the force of the river. The air in the service tunnels remains a constant subterranean cool, smelling of ozone, wet stone, and old grease. This key activity of power generation turned the sacred falls into the engine that electrified early Seattle, lighting the first street lamps and powering the first trolley cars. A cultural sub-destination that anchors the modern experience is the Salish Lodge and Spa. Perched on the very lip of the falls, the lodge's architecture utilizes heavy timbers and local stone to evoke the feel of a grand mountain retreat. Inside, the scent of wood smoke and honey, produced by the lodge's own hives, blends with the ever-present sound of the water. For many, the ritual of visiting the falls involves standing on the dining room balcony, feeling the spray on their face while watching the river vanish into the abyss. It is a place where the luxury of the present sits directly atop the raw, ancient power of the past. As we prepare to depart, we follow the river downstream, where the roar fades into a persistent, low-frequency hum. The air becomes slightly warmer as we move away from the waterfall's refrigerated microclimate. We are leaving the foothills and turning toward the literal and figurative high point of the state. Our trail leads us toward a giant that creates its own weather, a mountain so massive it acts as a landmark for the entire Salish Sea region. We are moving from a single leap of water to a massive kingdom of ice that sits atop a volcanic furnace. The scent of the low country cedar is being replaced by the sharp, thin air of the subalpine. Next, we arrive at the majestic Mount Rainier, known to the ancestors as Tahoma. We have reached the apex of our journey, rising 14,411 feet above sea level. Mount Rainier, known to the Puyallup, Yakima, and Nisqually as Tahoma, is not just a mountain. It is a gravitational force that dictates the weather, the rivers, and the psyche of the entire region. The air here is thin and tastes of high-altitude ice and the sharp, dry scent of sun-baked andesite. Geologically, Tahoma is the most dangerous volcano in the United States. It is a massive stratovolcano built by layer upon layer of lava flows and volcanic debris over the last 500,000 years. However, its true geological power lies in its instability. Unlike the solid granite of the Sierra Nevada, much of Rainier's upper cone has been weakened by hydrothermal alteration. Centuries of acidic volcanic gases and hot water circulating through the rock, turning hard basalt into soft, crumbly clay. This rotten rock supports the largest glacial system in the contiguous United States. 26 major glaciers including the massive Carbon and Emmons, drape the mountain like a heavy, frozen cloak. These glaciers contain as much ice as all other Cascade volcanoes combined. This creates a landscape of lahars, massive volcanic mudflows. Roughly 5,600 years ago, the Osceola mudflow swept down the mountain, carrying enough debris to fill Commencement Bay in Tacoma, 50 miles away. When you stand in the valley of the White River, you are standing on the dried remains of the mountain's previous collapses. The landscape is a study in vertical transition. The lower forest of massive western red cedar gives way to the silver forest. Ghostly stands of sun-bleached, dead trees killed by fire or insects, their trunks stripped of bark and polished by the wind. A unique sub-destination to witness this is the Sunrise area. At 6,400 feet, it is the highest point reachable by vehicle. Here, the ground is Felsenmeer, a sea of frost-shattered stones. The sound is a constant, high-altitude whistle of the wind through the scree slopes, occasionally broken by the crack of a glacier calving in the distance. The ground beneath you feels both ancient and profoundly restless. You are standing on a giant that is simultaneously being built by internal fires and torn down by the weight of its own ice. To climb the flanks of Tahoma is to travel through several biological latitudes in a single afternoon. The transition begins in the deep cathedral-like silence of the old-growth forest, where Douglas fir and western red cedar grow so thick they create their own dim, temperate microclimate. As you ascend, the air thins and the scent of damp earth is replaced by the spicy, citrus-like aroma of subalpine fir. The most famous ecological feature of Mount Rainier is its subalpine meadows. During the window of life in the brief, intense summer between July and August, the slopes of Paradise and Sunrise erupt in a floral display of staggering complexity. This isn't just a garden, it's a competitive race for survival. The avalanche lily often pokes its head through the receding snow, followed closely by the deep magenta of subalpine painted cup and the electric blue of Cascades gentian. These plants are extremophiles, designed to complete their entire reproductive cycle in less than 8 weeks before the snow returns. The fauna of the mountain has adapted to the vertical desert. The Cascade red fox is a unique subspecies found only in the high mountains of Washington. Smaller and more elusive than its lowland cousins, its coat can range from charcoal gray to a deep, burnt orange. In the higher alpine zone in above 7,000 feet, life becomes sparse. Here, the gray-crowned rosy finch thrives, foraging for insects blown up from the valleys and trapped on the surface of the glaciers. A key sub-destination for witnessing this high-altitude ecology is Paradise Valley. Here the soundscape is dominated by the rushing water of Edith Creek and the persistent, high-pitched eep of the American pika. However, the true masters of this terrain are the hoary marmots. You can often see them sprawled on sun-warmed basalt boulders, their silver-gray fur blending perfectly with the rock. Their survival depends on a massive accumulation of body fat. They spend 8 months of the year in a deep hibernation. their heart rates dropping to just a few beats per minute as the mountain above them is buried under 30 feet of snow. The interaction here is delicate. The mountain's legacy species like the white-tailed ptarmigan, Lagopus lucura, rely on the permanent snowfields for camouflage and cooling. As the glaciers retreat, these islands in the sky are shrinking, forcing the flora and fauna to move higher and higher toward the rocky, inhospitable summit. To understand the history of Tahoma is to recognize that the mountain is not a static monument, but a living, breathing participant in the human story of the Pacific Northwest. The air here carries the sharp, mineral scent of pulverized andesite and the ancient, frozen ozone of the Nisqually Glacier. For the Puyallup, Muckleshoot, Yakama, Tidnapam, and Nisqually people, the mountain's history is a continuum of spiritual practice and seasonal harvest that stretches back over 9,000 years. Archaeological evidence, such as stone tool fragments found in the high subalpine meadows, confirms that these nations have been visiting the mountain's flanks for millennia. They didn't just admire the peak from afar, they lived on its slopes during the summer months, gathering huckleberries and hunting mountain goats. Their deep time connection is encoded in the name Tahoma or Tacoma, which linguistically relates to the concept of the Mother of Waters. This reflects an ancient, sophisticated understanding of the mountain's role as the headwaters for the major river systems that sustain the lowlands. The colonial discovery of the mountain by Europeans began in 1792, when George Vancouver sighted the peak from Puget Sound. He named it after his friend, Rear Admiral Peter Rainier, a man who never actually saw the mountain that bears his name. This naming act was a point of friction for over a century, as local residents and indigenous groups fought to restore the original name. The 19th century transition also brought the golden age of mountaineering. In 1870, Hazard Stevens and P.B. Van Trump made the first recorded ascent of the summit, guided partway by a Sluiskin guide who famously warned them of the demons that lived in the crater's steam vents. A significant historical sub-destination is Longmire. Originally a homestead and mineral springs resort established by James Longmire in 1883, it became the first headquarters for Mount Rainier National Park after its establishment in 1899. The architecture of history here is visible in the Longmire Administration Building, a perfect example of early National Park Service rustic design. The smell of the sulfur spring still lingers in the air, a heavy, eggy scent that serves as a sensory reminder of the volcanic heat simmering just beneath the surface. The deep time of the mountain is also written in its scars. Throughout the park, you can see ghost forests, stands of silvered, barkless trees that were drowned by volcanic mud flows or buried by ash centuries ago. These are the mountain's rhythmic reminders that while human history is measured in decades, the mountain's history is measured in pulses. Long periods of icy silence, interrupted by moments of violent, landscape-altering heat. The architecture on the slopes of Tahoma is a deliberate exercise in National Park Service Rustic, a style born from the idea that human structures should be visual extensions of the natural world. In a place where the winter snowpack can exceed 20 meters, buildings must be both aesthetically quiet and structurally defiant. The air here smells of seasoned Douglas fir and the faint, sweet scent of mountain hemlock needles drying on sun-warmed stone. The crown jewel of this architectural philosophy is the Paradise Inn, completed in 1917. Constructed from silver forest cedar, trees salvaged from a massive fire that swept the mountain in the 19th century, the inn features a massive exposed beam lobby that mimics the verticality of the surrounding forest. The interior is a sensory sanctuary. The sound of the wind outside is muffled by thick stone walls, replaced by the crackle of two massive stone fireplaces built from local andesite. The furniture, handcrafted by German carpenter Hans Franke, is built from the same weathered cedar, its smooth, silvered surface feeling like polished bone. Culturally, Mount Rainier is the spiritual and recreational heart of the Pacific Northwest. For the indigenous nations, the culture of the mountain is one of reciprocity. It is a place for the annual harvest of huckleberries and medicine, a practice that continues today under treaty rights. This culture is rooted in the belief that the mountain provides for the people only if the people protect the mountain. The sound of this culture is found in the rhythmic thump of berry baskets being filled and the quiet, melodic prayers offered to the Mother of Waters. Parallel to this is the climbing culture centered at Camp Muir. This high-altitude outpost is a cultural sub-destination of its own. Here, the architecture is minimal, stone shelters built to withstand hurricane-force winds. The culture is one of intense focus and shared vulnerability. The soundscape is the metallic clink-clink of carabiners and the rhythmic crunch of crampons on the Cowlitz Glacier. It is a culture of early mornings and alpine starts, where the smell of freeze-dried coffee and sunblock dominates the thin, cold air. The key activity that bridges these cultures is the Wonderland Trail, a 150-kilometer loop that circumnavigates the mountain. Those who hike it participate in a modern ritual of endurance and observation, moving through every ecosystem the mountain has to offer. This cultural practice creates a community of Rainier watchers, people whose lives are lived in constant reference to whether the mountain is out, a regional phrase that signals a clear day and a visible summit. The legacy of Mount Rainier is its role as the ultimate sentinel of the Northwest. It is the source of 5 major river systems and the primary regulator of the region's climate. However, the mountain is currently in a state of rapid and visible transition. The Nisqually Glacier, one of the most studied glaciers in the world, has retreated more than a mile since the 1850s. This deglaciation is changing the very shape of the mountain, exposing unstable rotten rock that was previously held in place by ice, leading to more frequent rock falls and debris flows. This transition is felt most acutely in the valleys. As the glaciers shrink, the sediment load in the rivers increases, raising the riverbeds and making the surrounding forests more prone to flooding. The legacy of the mountain is shifting from one of eternal ice to one of dynamic instability. This is the challenge for the next generation of stewards, managing a landscape that is melting under its own weight, while remaining a sacred home for the indigenous people and a beacon for the millions who live in its shadow. As the sun sets, casting a deep, alpine glow violet across the Willis Wall, the temperature drops sharply. The mountain breath, the cold air sinking into the valleys, begins to pick up speed. The scent of the alpine flowers fades as they close for the night, replaced by the scent of cold, wet stone. We are preparing to leave the high kingdom of Tahoma. Our trail now leads us away from the peaks and back toward the lowlands, but we aren't heading back to the city yet. We are moving toward a place where the Earth's internal fire once reached out and touched the sky in a more modern, more violent way. We are moving toward the site of a transformation that changed the world's understanding of geology in a single morning. Next, we arrive at the beautiful broken landscape of Mount St. Helens. As we travel south from the massive ice-clad bulk of Tahoma, the horizon shifts. The familiar, symmetrical white cone you might expect from a Cascade giant is missing. Instead, we are greeted by a jagged, horseshoe-shaped crater, a mountain that literally lost its head. This is Mount St. Helens, known to the Cowlitz and Sahaptin peoples as Luit. We are entering a landscape that is less a park and more a vast open-air laboratory of raw geological trauma and miraculous rebirth. The geology here is defined by a single, world-altering moment. Unlike the slow, grinding erosion of glaciers, the transformation of this mountain happened in seconds. A magnitude 5.1 earthquake triggered the largest debris avalanche in recorded history as the entire north flank of the mountain slid away. This uncapped the pressurized magma below, resulting in a lateral blast that traveled at 300 miles per hour, leveling 230 square miles of ancient forest. The mountain's summit dropped from 9,677 feet to 8,363 feet in an instant. The first impression of the blast zone is one of profound, monochromatic scale. The air here is different from the mossy humidity of the Olympics. It is dry and smells faintly of tephra, the fine gray volcanic ash that still coats the ridges. The soundscape is eerie and quiet, dominated by the wind whistling through snags, the bleached upright skeletons of trees killed by the heat. There is a sense of geological noon here. The sun reflects harshly off the gray pumice plain, creating a landscape that feels more lunar than Pacific Northwestern. Standing at Johnston Ridge Observatory, you look directly into the throat of the volcano. The Crater Glacier, the youngest glacier on Earth, is currently growing around the steaming lava dome inside the horseshoe. It is a paradox of geology, ice forming in the heart of a furnace. Below the crater lies the pumice plain, a vast desert of volcanic rock that was once a lush river valley. The ground here is light and porous. If you pick up a piece of pumice, it feels impossibly airy, a stone frozen in the act of foaming. A unique sub-destination to feel the magnitude of this event is Spirit Lake. Once a deep blue alpine jewel lined with resorts, it is now partially covered by a log mat. Thousands of silvered trunks of old-growth Douglas fir that were swept into the lake by the blast and still float there today, 46 years later. The water is a strange, milky turquoise, filtered by volcanic minerals. The scent here is a mix of sun-bleached wood and the clean, sterile smell of a landscape starting over from zero. The history of Lewitt is a story of a sleeping giant that woke with a roar that changed modern volcanology. For the Cowlitz and Sahaptin peoples, the mountain's history is preserved in the legend of Luwit Latkla, the Fire Mountain. In their oral tradition, Luwit was a beautiful woman, transformed into a mountain to keep the peace between two warring brothers, Pato, Mount Adams, and Waist, Mount Hood. The 1980 eruption was not seen by the Cowlitz as a random disaster, but as a predictable cycle of a mountain that has always been the most active and restless in the Cascades. In the colonial era, the mountain was renamed by George Vancouver in 1792 after the British diplomat Alain Fitzherbert, 1st Baron St. Helens. For over a century, it was the Fuji of America, a near-perfect symmetrical cone and a premier destination for hiking and youth camps at Spirit Lake. This era of recreation ended abruptly in the spring of 1980. The key activity of that time was a massive, high-stakes scientific monitoring effort. Geologists like David Johnston camped on the ridges, tracking a bulge on the north face that was growing by 5 feet a day. When the mountain finally collapsed, Johnston's final radio transmission, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it," became a haunting cultural touchstone for the region. Today, the culture of the mountain is defined by ecological succession. It is a living laboratory where scientists and visitors witness the return of life to a sterilized landscape. A primary cultural activity is hiking the Hummocks Trail. Here, the hummocks, massive mounds of the mountain's former summit that landed miles away, are now covered in lupine. These flowers are pioneer species. They have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that allows them to fix nitrogen into the ash, essentially creating soil out of nothing. The sound of this culture is the buzzing of bees and the rustle of elk moving through the new willow thickets. A unique sub-destination for experiencing the human history of the blast is the Ape Cave. Located on the south side of the mountain, which was shielded from the 1980 blast, this 2-mile-long lava tube was formed nearly 2,000 years ago. Walking through it, the air is a constant, lightless cool, smelling of damp basalt and ancient minerals. It serves as a reminder that the 1980 event was just the latest chapter in a deep-time history of fire. As we prepare to depart, we look back at the gaping crater. The gray ash is beginning to be marbled with green as the forest marches back toward the summit. We are leaving the world of disturbance ecology behind and turning our sights toward the final chapter of our journey. Our path takes us away from the high peaks and toward the great liquid artery that carved the boundary of the state. We are moving toward a place where the mountains were not blown away, but sliced through by the most massive floods in Earth's history. The scent of the volcanic ash is fading, replaced by the smell of sagebrush and the deep moving water of the basalt canyons. Next, we arrive at our final destination, the majestic Columbia River Gorge. As we descend from the volcanic rubble of Lewitt, the landscape undergoes a dramatic structural shift. The mountains don't just stand before us, they open up. We have arrived at the Columbia River Gorge, an 80-mile canyon that cuts a sea-level path straight through the Cascade Range. This is the only place between British Columbia and California where a river has successfully sliced through the volcanic spine of the West. The geology here is a story of the Great Carving. The walls of the gorge are composed of layer upon layer of Columbia River basalt. Some of the largest lava flows on Earth, which erupted between 17 and 6 million years ago. But the shape of the gorge was finalized by the Missoula floods at the end of the last ice age. Imagine a wall of water 2,000 feet high, roaring through this canyon at 60 miles per hour, carrying icebergs and boulders the size of houses. This cataclysmic flushing scoured the canyon walls, leaving behind the hanging valleys that now host the gorge's famous waterfalls. The first impression of the gorge is one of immense horizontal power. The air is radically different here. It is a wind tunnel effect caused by the pressure difference between the cool, damp coast and the hot, dry interior. The scent is a transition. The wet, peaty smell of the Douglas fir forests in the west begins to mix with the dry, spicy scent of ponderosa pine and sagebrush as we move east. The soundscape is dominated by a persistent, rushing wind that whistles through the basalt columns and the low-frequency thrum of the river itself. Standing at the Vista House atop Crown Point, you are perched 733 feet above the water on a promontory of solid basalt. Looking east, the gorge stretches out like a green and gray corridor of impossible scale. Below, the Columbia River, the great river of the West, flows with a deceptive glassy smoothness, hiding the immense volume of water moving toward the Pacific. A unique sub-destination to feel this geology is Beacon Rock. This is the core of an ancient volcano, the plug of hard basalt that remained after the rest of the mountain was eroded away by the Missoula floods. Climbing the Switchback Trail, you feel the sheer verticality of the rock. Its surface cold and unyielding, while the wind tries to pull you toward the river below. It is a place where you can touch the literal skeleton of the Cascades. The history of the Columbia River Gorge is a story of a great highway that has funneled life, trade, and power for over 10,000 years. For the Nez Perce, Umatilla, Warm Springs, and Yakama tribes, the gorge was, and is, the center of a vast regional economy. Their history is anchored at Snoqualmie Falls, once the most significant fishing and trading site in North America. For millennia, the sound of the gorge was the roar of these falls and the rhythmic thwack of dip nets hitting the water. The air smelled of drying, wind-cured salmon, a cultural staple that linked the interior tribes to the coastal nations. The colonial transition was marked by the arrival of Lewis and Clark in 1805, who used the river as their final corridor to the Pacific. However, the most visible historical key activity of the modern era is the construction of the historic Columbia River Highway in 1913. Engineered by Samuel Hill and Samuel Lancaster, it was the first planned scenic roadway in the United States. Designed with poetry in every curve, the road features hand-carved stone guardrails and elegant bridges that mimic the natural arches of the basalt cliffs. The scent of the highway is a mixture of damp moss and the sweet vanilla-like aroma of ponderosa pine bark warming in the sun. A cultural sub-destination that bridges the gap between the industrial and the natural is the Bonneville Lock and Dam. Built during the Great Depression, it transformed the wild, surging river into a series of navigable pools. Inside the visitor center, you can watch through underwater windows as Chinook salmon and Pacific lamprey struggle up the fish ladders. The culture here is one of constant negotiation between human energy needs and the biological imperatives of the river's oldest residents. The sound is a low industrial hum of turbines, a mechanical heartbeat that powers the entire region. Another vital cultural layer is found in the windsurfing and kiteboarding community centered in Hood River. Because the gorge acts as a natural funnel, the rituals of the modern residents are dictated by the wind. On a high-pressure day, the river is dotted with hundreds of colorful sails, a vibrant, high-speed dance against the gray-green backdrop of the basalt walls. It is a culture of the blow, where life stops when the pressure gradient between the coast and the desert reaches its peak. As we prepare to depart, we leave the lush, waterfall-draped west end of the gorge. The trees are thinning, and the basalt is becoming more exposed, sun-scorched and stark. We are turning north, away from the river's path, toward the heart of the Scablands. We are moving toward a place where the water didn't just flow, it exploded across the landscape, leaving behind a ghost of a waterfall that makes the Niagara look like a trickling tap. The air is becoming dry and dusty, smelling of sage and parched earth. Next, we arrive at the silent, prehistoric thunder of Dry Falls. As we pull away from the Columbia River, the lush greens of the gorge evaporate, replaced by a stark, skeletal landscape of burnt orange and deep charcoal. We have entered the channeled Scablands, a terrain so alien that early geologists struggled to explain its existence. We are standing at the brink of Dry Falls, a geological ghost that represents one of the most violent hydrological events in Earth's history. The geology here is defined by the Great Mystery. For decades, the mainstream scientific community couldn't believe that a single event could carve this landscape. It wasn't until J. Harlan Bretz proposed the theory of the Missoula floods that the truth emerged. Roughly 15,000 years ago, an ice dam holding back glacial Lake Missoula, containing as much water as Lake Ontario and Lake Erie combined, burst. A wall of water hundreds of feet high tore across eastern Washington, fueled by a flow rate 10 times the combined flow of all the world's rivers. At this exact spot, that flood encountered a massive basalt precipice. The result was a waterfall 3.5 miles wide with a drop of over 400 feet. More than twice the height and 3 times the width of Niagara Falls. The sheer force of the water didn't just fall, it plucked massive hexagonal columns of Columbia River basalt right out of the ground, migrating the falls backward to create the deep 15-mile-long Grand Coulee. The first impression of Dry Falls is one of haunting, echoing silence. The air is bone-dry and smells of parched sagebrush and sun-baked mineral dust. There is no sound of rushing water here today, only the occasional whistle of the wind as it whips around the alcoves of the abandoned cataract. The scale is difficult for the human eye to process. The plunge pools at the base of the cliffs are now quiet. Alkaline lakes, their deep blue surfaces contrasting sharply with the jagged vertical walls of the precipice. Standing at the Dry Falls Interpretive Center, you look out over a landscape that was literally flayed of its soil. The scablands are the exposed bones of the earth, naked basalt ridges scoured clean of the fertile loess that once covered them. The sensory experience is one of vast, horizontal heat and vertical shadow. A place where the memory of the water is so strong, you can almost hear the roar if you close your eyes and listen to the wind. The history of Dry Falls is a narrative of catastrophism, a realization that the earth is shaped not just by slow erosion, but by sudden, violent pulses of energy. For the Colville, Sandpoil, and Okanagan peoples, the Grand Coulee was never a dry mystery. It was a seasonal sanctuary. Their oral traditions speak of a time when monsters and great waters reshaped the land. The key activity for these nations was the harvesting of bitterroot and the management of the unique desert ecology. The air here carries the scent of sun-baked sage and the dusty, sweet smell of curing grasses. The transition to modern scientific history is dominated by the figure of J. Harlan Bretz. In the 1920s, Bretz defied the geological establishment by proposing that a Spokane flood had carved the scablands. He was ridiculed for decades. The idea of a Noachian scale flood seemed like heresy to geologists who believed in slow, uniform change. The culture of Dry Falls today is one of intellectual vindication. It is a pilgrimage site for scientists who come to study the giant ripple marks. Ripples in the earth 30 feet high that can only be seen from the air, proving the depth and speed of the water. A cultural sub-destination that bridges the ancient and the modern is Sun Lake's Dry Falls State Park. Down in the basin, where the water once thundered, the culture is one of desert recreation. The soundscape shifts from the whistling wind of the rim to the plink of fishing lines hitting the alkaline lakes and the call of the canyon wren, whose descending, silver-toned song echoes off the basalt walls. Here, the architecture of the land provides the entertainment. The sheer verticality of the Umatilla rock formation creates a natural amphitheater for the desert's quietest sounds. As we leave the silent prehistoric brink of Dry Falls, we follow the path carved by the ancient floods northward to where concrete meets the sky. We arrive at Grand Coulee, a structural colossus that stands as the industrial answer to the Missoula floods. While Dry Falls represents the raw, unbridled power of ancient water, the Grand Coulee Dam represents its modern, measured heartbeat. The air here loses the dusty stillness of the scablands and takes on a metallic pressurized charge. The sound is a low-frequency hum, a sub-vibration of 6,809 megawatts of electricity being pulled from the river's gravity. The architecture is a study in the sublime, a wall of concrete nearly a mile long that smells of damp stone and ozone. This was the key activity that transformed the region, turning the Columbia River into an engine that electrified the West and pumped life-giving water into the thirsty desert. But our journey does not end with the hum of the turbines. As the sun begins to tilt toward the horizon, the jagged basalt and rotten rock of the coulees finally begin to soften. The harsh, vertical shadows of the scablands are being replaced by long, undulating curves of earth that look like frozen waves of green silk. We are leaving the world of disturbance, the floods, the fires, and the eruptions, and moving toward a landscape of accumulation. The scent of dry sage and wet concrete is fading, replaced by the sweet, cereal aroma of winter wheat and the rich, loamy scent of loess soil. The wind no longer whistles through basalt columns, it whispers through millions of stalks of grain. Next, we arrive at our final destination, the velvet, rolling waves of the Palouse. We have reached the far edge of the state's map. As we leave the jagged, scarred basalt of the channeled scablands, the horizon suddenly softens into a rhythmic, undulating sea of earth. This is the Palouse, a landscape so visually distinct it feels less like a geological formation and more like a work of abstract art. The air here is no longer thin or metallic. It is thick with the scent of sun-warmed dust and the sweet herbal aroma of curing winter wheat. Geologically, the Palouse is a study in aeolian, windborne accumulation. While the rest of Washington was being carved by ice or flooded by lava, this region was being built grain by grain. Over the last 2 million years, prevailing winds from the southwest gathered fine-grained silt, known as loess, from the parched plains of the Pasco Basin and deposited it here. These aren't just hills, they are massive silt dunes some reaching depths of 250 feet. The landscape is defined by the waves. Because the silt was deposited by wind, the hills are asymmetrical, steep on the northeast side, and gentle on the southwest. This creates a dune and swale topography that looks like a frozen storm at sea. There are no straight lines here. Every fence, road, and furrow follows the serpentine contour of the earth. The first impression of the Palouse is one of overwhelming shifting color. Depending on the season, the hills move from a vibrant electric spring green to a heavy metallic summer gold, and finally to the rich dark umber of freshly plowed soil. Standing atop Steptoe Butte, a 3,612-foot island of ancient quartzite that poked through both the lava flows and the silt, you can see for 50 miles in every direction. The soundscape is the Palouse whisper, the sound of millions of stalks of wheat rubbing against each other in the constant, restless wind. This is a landscape that feels infinite, where the vertical constraints of the mountains we left behind are replaced by a vast horizontal freedom. The ground beneath you isn't rock. It is a soft, deep, and impossibly fertile flower that holds the history of the wind. The history of the Palouse is a story of a silt sea that has sustained human life for over 11,000 years. For the Palouse and Nez Perce, this was a land of immense seasonal abundance. Long before the first plow touched the earth, the hills were a mosaic of camas flowers and bunch grass. The deep time of the region is etched into the Nez Perce relationship with the Appaloosa horse. The rolling topography and nutritious grasses provided the perfect breeding ground for these sturdy, spotted horses, which transformed the tribe into one of the most powerful and mobile nations of the plateau. The transition to the modern era began in the 1870s and 1880s, when settlers realized that the deep loess soil was essentially black gold. This led to the Great Plowing, a period of rapid agricultural expansion that replaced the native prairie with a sea of cereal grains. The key activity of this era was the development of specialized farming technology. Because the hills are so steep, some slopes exceeding 50% grades, standard tractors would simply roll over. This gave rise to the side hill harvester, a massive machine with a leveling system that allows the body of the combine to stay level, while its wheels and headers follow the extreme tilt of the land. The historical soundscape of the Palouse is the rhythmic chug of these harvesters and the dry, paper-like rustle of the wheat being cut. The air smells of chaff, the fine golden husks of the grain that float in the air during the August harvest, catching the light like a low-hanging mist. A significant historical sub-destination is Steptoe Battlefield. It serves as a somber reminder of the 1858 conflict between the U.S. Army and a find of Coeur d'Alene, Palouse, and Spokane warriors. Standing here, the history feels layered. The ancient quartzite of the butte below your feet is billions of years old. The silt on top is thousands of years old, and the human scars of the landscape are barely a century deep. The architecture of the Palouse is defined by the vertical in a horizontal world. In a landscape of rolling curves, human structures are sharp, geometric interruptions. The most iconic of these is the Palouse barn, often built into the side of a hill to allow for two-level access. These barns are made of weathered larch or cedar. Their red paint faded by decades of intense high desert sun to a soft, dusty rose. The culture here is one of agrarian patience. Life is dictated by the crop cycle, the long wait for the winter snow to melt, the frantic greening of the spring, and the high-stakes gamble of the summer harvest. This has created a community of hill watchers who can tell the health of a crop by the specific shade of green on a north-facing slope. The culture is celebrated in towns like Colfax and Pullman, where the architecture of the main street still reflects the wealth of the early 20th century wheat boom. Sturdy brick buildings that feel anchored against the shifting dunes of silt. A unique cultural sub-destination is the Artisans at the Damen Barn in Uniontown. Once a functional dairy barn, it is now a creative hub. Famously surrounded by a wheel fence made of over 1,000 antique wagon and tractor wheels. It represents the modern Palouse culture, a blending of the region's hard-working mechanical past with a new identity as a haven for photographers and artists drawn to the Palouse light. The light here is a cultural phenomenon in itself. Because there are no trees to break the shadows, the golden hour on the Palouse creates a high-contrast landscape where every ripple in the earth is magnified. This photographic culture brings people from around the world to stand on the gravel shoulders of the back roads, silent and waiting for the sun to hit a specific fold in the earth. As we reach the end of our journey across Washington, the legacy of the Palouse reveals itself as one of fragile abundance. The very thing that makes this land famous, its deep, powdery Loess soil, is also its greatest vulnerability. Without the deep roots of the original bunchgrass to hold it, the wind and rain can strip the hills of their fertility. The legacy of the modern Palouse is the transition toward no-till farming and conservation buffers, an effort to keep the soil on the hills and out of the rivers. The transition we feel now is the closing of the circle. We have traveled from the salt spray of the Pacific to the rain-shadowed forests of the Olympics, through the volcanic fires of the Cascades, across the flood-scarred Scablands, and finally to these quiet, ancient dunes of dust. The sun is setting behind Steptoe Butte, casting a shadow that stretches for miles across the wheat. The Palouse whisper is growing louder as the evening wind picks up. The air is cooling, smelling of dry earth and the coming night. Our journey through the evergreen state, a land of ice, fire, water, and wind, is complete. As the light fades across the rolling crests of the Palouse and the last glow touches the rhythmic waves of wheat, our journey ends where the wind began. With a landscape that defines the horizon, the seasons, and the quiet endurance of the land itself. We stand atop Steptoe Butte, and this is where our trail across Washington comes to a close. Looking back, we can see this state not as a single destination, but as a living tapestry of landscapes and stories. We traveled from the salt spray and cedar rot of the Olympic coast to the moss-draped silence of the Hoh rainforest. We climbed into the high, frozen sanctuaries of the Cascades, stood in the shadow of the massive ice-clad bulk of Tahoma, and witnessed the raw geological trauma and rebirth of Lewitt. We followed the path of cataclysmic floods through the Columbia River Gorge, stood before the silent thunder of Dry Falls, and felt the industrial heartbeat of the Grand Coulee. Washington is a state defined by contrast, but bound together by a sense of profound scale. We have moved between the vertical power of volcanoes and the horizontal freedom of the silt dunes, experiencing a world shaped by fire, ice, water, and wind. Each stop has shown us something different, not just about the shifting geology of the Pacific Northwest, but about the resilience of the life and the people who have shaped this frontier and been shaped by it in return. Whether you've walked these rugged coastlines before, or discovered the Palouse whisper for the first time with us today, we hope this journey gave you a deeper appreciation for the beauty and complexity of this extraordinary corner of the world. Thank you for traveling with Era Trails. We wish you a great day wherever you are. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again as we explore more of the world's extraordinary places.